Now going into another talk by Nizar. And so if you're ready, you can start off. Yes.
Thank you. If you don't mind, I'd like to do it sitting. And I prepared my notes so that I don't go off script too much. As you can tell, this is a subject I'm very passionate about. I like talking about it. And part of our conversation, Sam and I, was about what is something that would be useful for this conference that often is missing. And what I will touch upon is the changes in the Middle East. What are the sources of the conflict? Why do we always hear conflict from the Middle East? And it is directly attached, in my opinion, to the innovation that's now happening. Like there's a lot in the technological innovations that are happening in the world that has helped open up spaces in the Arab world that were not available before that, and even in Iran and Turkey, in the Middle East. So I'm going to make that, let's say, social connection of how AI and technology and innovation presents itself in social circles with the example of the Middle East. So the first thing I want to start with is that why is the Middle East important, right? One is, of course, we know oil, right? The Suez Canal, right? There's strategic importance of, we saw what happened when that ship got stuck in the canal, right? Terrorism, for many people, religion, right? So like the Holy Land, it's important for literally billions of people, right? So there are many reasons why, for better or worse, the Middle East gets a lot of attention. Whether it's merited or not is a different question. But it happens to get a lot of attention, and therefore it's important for Asia to think of Western Asia as an important space for involvement and influence, and not to leave it to other countries. Even starting with the fact that it's called Middle East as opposed to Western Asia or the Arab world, right? In the nomenclature itself, it sets a reference, point of reference. And I would argue that conflicts in the Middle East, while they are disproportionate compared to other areas of Asia, are in fact symptoms and not the causes of the lack of development. In many ways, people compare, in fact, Korea to Egypt. That in the 1800s, Korean students went to Cairo to study, and now see where Korea is and where Egypt is. And the thesis, I would say, is that while Korea did have its turmoils, it did have, so as well as Singapore and Malaysia and many of the Asian tigers, had a sufficient time of stability, both social stability with economic prosperity, to allow for society to be able to first provide for its people, right? Each family to be able to provide for itself first to survive, and then to start asking the questions, the social questions of what do we want as far as freedoms and what have you. And this is something that was constantly interrupted in the Middle East. So starting with, in fact, like one symbolic thing that is useful in just understanding what's happening in the Middle East is the fact that up until Napoleon invaded Egypt in the late 18th century, that part of the world had no idea where the Western countries have arrived as far as technology. So much so that when the British came to Egypt as dignitaries, trying to warn the Egyptians that the French are coming to occupy you, the Egyptians said, oh, we're going to stomp them with the bottoms of the hoofs of our horses. So they thought that with their cavalry, they can fight the French, not knowing that the French not only had a very strong army, but also had cannons and technology that would destroy them. So that first, let's say, interaction where Egypt was literally devastated, had no idea what hit them, had a ripple effect across the Arab and Muslim world, where there was a sudden realization that the world now is somewhere completely different. They're much stronger, they're much more prosperous, and how did we lag? And the reaction in the Arab world has been, and the Muslim world, has been one of two reactions. One was, oh my God, the West is so advanced, we need to understand how they got advanced, learn everything from them, and completely emulate them, and then get better than them in their art, right? And another school of thought that said, we are backwards because we've left the righteous path. We need to go back to our religion and our traditions, and come back to our original values. And that's what's going to save us, bring us back to our glory. Because, of course, there was the Muslim Empire and the Abbasid Empire that was one of the largest empires in the world. In fact, Baghdad was a famous center of learning. So the interpretation of what happened is that, oh, we moved away from the righteous path. And practically in the last 100 or so years, that has been the main political conversation in society. Do we change a lot? Or do we change a little bit and to react to modernity? Right? So it is a reaction to change. Do we completely revolt to on the way our traditions work and change our alphabet the way Turkey did and do basic and fundamental changes to society? Or do we say, no, we need to go back to tradition and be more like Saudi Arabia, which went, no, we need to celebrate tradition and not get our identities erased by this Western cultural hegemony. Right? Similarly, Iran. So Iran was a pretty liberal state with the Shah, but because of interventions, right? So there was an experience of a coup d'etat in Iran in the 50s that was supported by Western powers because of oil interests. The memory of the Iranians is that they associate that modernity, right, with the neo-colonialism or this interventionist policy of the West. So when the revolution happened in 1979, a lot of it had to do with independence. In fact, that they wanted to be able to decide their own fate independent of Western intervention, right? So the simple thing of just not wearing a tie, just to make it a statement, that Iranian officials do not wear ties because we're not going to do like all the other third world countries that are just emulating the West like parrots, right? So you can't really overstate the importance of that identity element of it. In the Arab world, or for example, like, while in Turkey, they completely adopted that modernization. Now, in the Arab world, there was a strong strong political control of the secular political parties, that school of thought that believed that we need to emulate the West and catch up to them. And their interpretation was that tradition was bad, and therefore they oppressed the more traditional and conservative political forces. And part of the tragedy is that, in fact, in the 1800s, and even up to the 1930s, there was, in fact, a lot of political plurality in the Arab world. And all of that got stifled from the 40s, Second World War onwards, because a lot of political movements or political direction was around the West continues, even after the decolonization of many Arab countries. The West continues to meddle in our affairs. There is no time for democracy and liberal individual freedoms. We need to protect ourselves first. And we cannot protect ourselves if we are in disarray. So this emphasis on authority and conformism came at the expense of individual freedoms. And whether it was communists or Islamists, they were in fact oppressed. Now, with the failure of all of these regimes, all of these secular regimes that promised prosperity and promised to do all sorts of things, they failed with the 1967 war and the different declines in the 70s and 80s. The lesson that the Arab world learned was that all of that modernization, all of that westernization clearly is the problem. Why should we give up on our traditions and our ways of life when clearly when we did that, we didn't reap any benefits, right? So there is this, I don't want to call it reaction, but it's reversion to old ways because the new ways haven't borne any fruit. Now, fast forward to the Arab Spring, a lot of the technological changes allowed citizens in the Arab world and the Middle East to see possibilities that they didn't know were possible, right? To see Milosevic being ousted through people power, right? To see innovations that India managed to do thanks to its own local scientists, right? Innovations that the Arab world was not able to do. So India was able to have a nuclear weapon, was able to launch satellites and so on and so forth, despite its poverty, right? So there was this access to a world and to examples of how things could be different. And without that essence, or that potentiality, right? Like they see what's happening in other places of the world, thanks to social media and satellites and what have you, they start thinking, okay, well, this could happen here as well, right? So that was a lot of the energy and the currency for change, despite it being risky, came from that exposure, that interaction. And to some extent, there was a lot of iteration in it. So if we take the example of Iran again, so in 1979 there was the Islamic Revolution, which in fact was not an Islamic revolution. Like the whole population was revolting against the dictator, but then the Islamists were able to basically take all of it, right? Come to the 2000s, the Iranian population, the younger one especially, started realizing that all of this talk about the revolution and making Iran a power in the region, and that is true of all Iranians, they feel that they have a right to a worthy status in the region because they used to be an empire and what have you, regardless of where they fall on the political spectrum. The question is how to achieve that. They saw that the regime and the way it's operating is just not sustainable and is just isolating them and is causing more economic strife, and there is no way we can be the superpower that we want to be in the region while letting those traditional conservative forces do that. So you had a revolution in 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, and the latest one last year, right? So in each of those revolutions, they learned something. And they didn't learn by themselves, they also impacted the Arabs, right? So when you look at the Cedar Revolution in Lebanon in 2005, a lot of it also was influenced by seeing that even Iran, that had a very strong authoritarian regime, people rebelled and were willing to take risks despite the very big price. And then come the Arab Spring, one of the things that is often a misconception is while there is poverty, people do not go in uprising because they're poor. The uprising happens because people feel that they don't have a fair shot at prosperity. They rebel against the injustice of not being able to access resources, or because a certain number of elites are hoarding all the resources, right? Because if the Arab Spring was about poverty, then it should have started in Egypt and not in Tunisia, right? So that let's say political maturation that's happening in the Arab world of realizing, okay, this trying to quickly modernize is not working, thinking that there is a leader that has all the solutions and we need to follow them and accept that they are right when they say all the other voices need to be, all dissenting voices need to be shut down because we need to protect ourselves from the West. That also didn't work, right? But then also understanding that I might not like the political views of the other faction or the religion of the other faction, but they are here. And they have their own interests and they want certain things. If they don't get a bit of what they think is very important, I'm not going to get what I want. I might not like it, but I'm going to have to deal with it. So that level of maturation, of political maturation, of realizing that politics is really local, that you as a citizen need to do something, you can't wait for the politicians to do something about it, was a process where they saw examples in the world, right? And then they started seeing possibilities in their own communities. And so that, let's say, broad space of learning, the ability to access so much information and so many examples allowed for new ideas to grow, but also for hope to grow, right? And in many ways, while a lot of people argue that the Arab Spring has had a very bad impact through internal strife, the war in Syria, and what have you, I do believe that the genie is out of the bottle. Right? People in the Arab world, you cannot bring back people to thinking, oh, dictatorships are a good idea. Now, there is some sense of nostalgia to the stability of dictatorship. So Putin can be very popular, right? So there is an argument between stability and democracy, right? So people argue, we do not want democracy the way it is in Iraq, right, where there is so much killing. But when you talk to the Iraqis, they say, no, we want our democracy with the killing. We don't mind it because we would rather have freedom with the risk of death than to have a life that's truncated because we don't have freedoms. And I have a lot of respect for the Iraqis. I worked in Iraq several times. And that's why I believe the genie is out of the bottle. Similarly with women. Right? Once they realize that, no, I am a woman, I have rights, she's not waiting for society or the leaders to do something about it. They're doing something now about it, right? So this sense that they, as an individual, they come with individual rights, inalienable rights, and they're going to need to do something about it because everything else hasn't worked, and the older generation has failed us. While this might be seen by many that it's tragic that they're not learning the lessons of the past, I would argue the hope is in the fact that they're starting from a personal place. That each of them as an individual feels that they have a right to a better life, and they're not going to wait for someone to make it for them. They're going to do something about it. Yes, it's very chaotic. Yes, it's not organized, but it's definitely no one can actually capture it. So while there are authoritarian regimes, I don't think these regimes are sustainable because there is no leader to that movement, right? People just now realize that what they have is unacceptable. They don't know how to move to a better system, but at the same time, they know they don't want to go back to the way things were. And here is where I think the rest of Asia comes in that many East Asian countries have had similar challenges with ethnic strife, wars, and poverty, and serious poverty. And then there were specific pivotal decisions made, key social and socio-political changes that were introduced that helped lower the attractiveness of revolution or coup d'etat, right? Where there was this realization, yeah, I don't have everything I want, but this stability is allowing me to get some marginal benefit that I can build on, right? So to the extent that people in the Middle East and or let's say West Asia can learn from examples in the Far East, that's going to help, again, introduce more ideas and more ways of reaching that goal of achieving social peace in order to create that system that is not only respects rights but also is sustainable. Another example I would give is how a lot of the innovation, for example, is how many understood that we live in societies that are very conservative. Identity is very important, and traditions are very important. So there are these Yemeni imams I worked with, or I did a training with, and I learned their lesson of how they introduced change in rural communities that have almost 80% illiteracy, where rather than saying, oh, we need to have democracy, we need to have votes, we need to have this separation of powers, they actually came from religious jurisprudence to argue Islam requires every Muslim to be involved in politics and not allow a tyrant to do X, Y, Z, right? Now, the manifestation of that is that you need to vote, right? And you need to vote with your conscience, right? But they don't call it democracy. They just call it doing your Islamic duty, right? So it's a question of understanding your milieu, your ecosystem, and understanding in this system, what does change look like, right? Because ultimately, you want to be able to have these people achieve their goals, their interests, right? Through ways that are not necessarily drastic as coups d'etats or terrorism or extremism. Finally, the example I would want to give that is refreshing is when China got involved in bringing the Iranians and the Saudis together, right? That was a very pleasant surprise. Even if at the level of something novel, that, oh, somebody other than the United States can intervene and intervene positively and without making a lot of noise, and be successful, right? So just the example of new ways of interacting with the Middle East, I think are going to go very far in allowing new ideas and new ways of thinking and new ways of modernizing that are not threatening to key elements in Arab societies that are resisting the change. So in many ways, this is where I see the connection with innovation, is that more interaction between East Asia and West Asia is going to allow for a lot of creativity, a lot of out-of-the-box thinking that both sides of Asia are going to benefit tremendously from.
All right, wonderful. I mean, I have personally learned a lot. Thank you very much, Nizar. So one thing I want to start off asking a question is that for you, Rajan, I want to, if you could introduce some examples or cases of how some of these organizations out there that use AI to really pursue social equity. If you could kind of share some of the examples with us, that's going to be great. Or even your personal, the dent that you're running. And to you, I want to ask you a question about, so which do you think among the Arab states are the ones that are, at that experimental stage, but, they're kind of in that success mode? And how could we use that as a case, a leverage to kind of share the best practices that other countries can learn from, right? And of course, that's going to require a lot of shift in the mindset at the same time. You're going to be allowing different stakeholders to voice out. And, which are the countries that you consider as a successful case? Maybe we can go with these questions, and then I'm going to be opening up to the floor, okay?
Yeah, I think I shared a few in the presentation of case studies. And I think the exciting part is that we haven't seen most of the case studies because we're at a place right now where things have become more accessible. And within AI in particular, I think this real recent wave of large language models is the stuff that we saw, the protein folding that AlphaFold has been doing for years now. That's been going on, and that should illustrate the power of AI to so many. But most people in the world didn't know what AI was or didn't see it. And it's not that it became more powerful in the last couple years or months even, it's that it's more accessible. It's you can type in words, it can use our language, versus when it's doing protein folding, it's like doing protein folding, which if you don't understand, you're like, okay, I don't get this.
Rajan, so in connection with that, one thing I want to kind of ask is that how do you really, social equity, right? So you're going to need a device or a bit of an equipment or device and a little bit of access to how you want to use that, right? To, in the scheme of pursuing social equity. How might you want to do that for especially people with low-income families and less access to these available sources?
Yeah, so I can talk about that now. And what we do, we work with high school students in Baltimore City, and one of the things we believe is exactly that access to these resources and technologies is a big barrier to equity. Even you were sharing some of that before. And we, for instance, one of the things we do is 3D printing. So we have our students who may have never seen a 3D printer, never heard of it. Now they're actually getting access to that and they're learning how to use it. And that tool is power because it can turn their ideas into reality and they can wield it. And so I'm interested in saying, how do we democratize and share access to these resources so that everybody has the power? And again, this is where I said it's about that curiosity, because the student who knows how a 3D printer works and all the details of it is going to be able to wield that much better than the next student. And we'll be able to create the next 3D printer. And so we're going to see that happen with access to these models as well. But the other thing I think of is not only how do we leverage this power through giving more access, because that is imperfect. There's still societal structures, political structures, access to financial capital, social capital, that even when you have a catalyzed young person who's creative, who can use a technology to make change, we still see inequity growing, right? And I think with AI, we're going to get to I hope we may get to a point where it's not just, look, capitalism is great and it's led to innovation and progress, but it has led to increased inequity at the same time. We might get to a point where it's, wait a minute, we're telling young people when you need to study, you need to work, because you got to get that job, because then that's how you earn money and that's how you provide for your family and that's the purpose of life in some way. Then we're going to say, wait a minute, machines can actually do a lot of these things that we've tricked ourselves into saying, this is your purpose of life. And the purpose of a human is different now. And what should a human have? What should be a right versus what should you have to do and work? And the fact that this is, unfortunately, in the past, those other industrial revolutions impacted mostly blue-collar workers, and I think, and poor people. And the reality is, okay, more poor people out of work, they'll adapt, they'll figure it out, we'll make some changes. But it never really led to any change because the people in power didn't see anything different. Now that's going to change, and everybody's going to get impacted. And I think all of a sudden we're like, okay, we should maybe think of a social contract alongside this. Capitalism is good. And when we get to that point, I think we can start to really make progress on broad social equity and not just say, hey, how can technology help? Because I think a lot of the problem is we've been using technology or access or things like that to say, look, we're making strides on equity. When you look at it and zoom out, it's like, no, this is still the same system, same power being perpetuated. So I hope we get really to a place of re-examining with all of this.
Just to add on what you said, actually, definitely, what's important here is the innovation part, the understanding that the value that you bring is the idea, right? Nothing is more resilient and contagious than an idea, right? And this is something that people in the Arab world have understood. So getting people into understanding that imagination, this is actually what Einstein said, imagination is far more important than intelligence. Because it's imagination that helps you imagine the solution, right? And likewise, with the technological developments, I completely agree that it's going to disrupt all of these social structures, and people in the vanguard are going to be able to imagine how this technology could be used to go towards a society, better society, a society that looks more than like what we want. And just to answer your question, I would hands down Iraq, definitely. While the situation is very difficult, I've been very humbled by seeing 25, 27-year-old Iraqis reach across the aisle, Arabs, Kurds, Shia, Sunni, within 3 days of a workshop. We started with one woman saying she was a pro-Saddam, her family was pro-Saddam before the war, and basically saying that the Kurds destroyed Iraq. To, at the end of the workshop, realizing that no, they have similar challenges as we have in corrupt government and elites sucking all the resources. We need to work together, right? So suddenly everything flipped because she realized that what she really wants is a better life, and her Kurdish colleague also wants a better life. And I'm very proud that many of those people ended up actually coordinating in the demonstrations in 2017 because they had met and realized that they actually have the same cause. It might look different, but it is the same cause. And they are experimenting and doing iterations of experimentation of what would that look like for our government to be for the people and by the people.
Wonderful. Same cause, same interest, same needs, right? Across the board. Yeah, please. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Allison Shapira. I teach public speaking. My question is for you. I knew your name, but you just covered up your name. So it was Rajan. That's it, Rajan. I'm using AI to help people improve their public speaking skills. And I wanted to ask you, you talked about the implications of AI across a multiplicity of areas. And I haven't heard anyone yet define the perfect system of governance. Not perfect. What would be, if you could wave a magic wand and we had the right system of governance in place internationally that both preserves innovation and protects equity and human life, what would that look like?
Oh, good question.
I surely don't know.
But guess.
But, well, I think the question is what's important because even now when we think about who is in charge, like it is power to be designing these systems, right? Just like it's been power to design anything, like I think that design fundamentally is power. And what is, like, you know, the companies are developing this saying, oh, we're trying to make it not do bad, right? These language models. Well, what's bad and what's your definition of bad? And so when you think of like what's the right or best system of governance, it's based on what's your definition of that. And it's a big question mark. I think they're looking to regulatory industry saying, we want to be regulated, but by the way, you don't understand this yet. We understand it better, so you're not ready to regulate us.
Yes.
So trust us, and we're going to make the best first pass that this does good, and then you'll learn and come along. And I mean, the systems theoretically can do so much, and especially when you get to like, you know, AGI and like superhuman power. But who's going to be the one saying this is what it should do or shouldn't do? Currently, I feel like unfortunately, it's the repeating pattern of those who are in power are going to get to be the deciders. And I'm not sure how to reckon with that and to say, how do we design this technology such that it is for a greater or global good? And even in, you know, outside of the technology world, in democracy, we've seen the problems of it's not as simple as, hey, you get a voice, therefore you're represented, therefore we're always going to pick good people who will look out for the best in all of us, and that's the answer. And I think that same thing comes with design. Like, you can get all the people in the room, but how do we actually do something that, you know, I don't think there's a solution for 8 billion people, but I hope these questions are continuously asked, and I hope people more intelligent than I give you an actual answer.
All right. You know, we're actually over time. What we're going to do is that may I ask these two gentlemen to, you know, stay behind and maybe carry on with the conversation. But can we give a big round of applause for sharing their insights on